G'day, it's Kareem here on Does It Matter Again. Today I want to talk about free speech and give my perspective on it, because I really do think that there seems to be some broad misunderstandings about free speech, what it is and why it's necessary. And it's very easy for the subject to get conflated and rolled into ideological assumptions and constructs that really, one, are nowhere near the same priority as having access to free-flowing communicative networks that are based on free speech, and also, apart from necessarily occupying a lower priority, are themselves demonstrably unproven and unempirical. We see clear evidence, empirical evidence, for the necessity for free speech and free communicative networks. We don't see evidence for a lot of the claims that would increasingly allow authoritarianism of various types and political stripes to shut down and cancel free speech. So I think free speech is my ability to voice any single thought I wish to you. It does not create any need for you to listen to me further. It does not harm you at all. It might offend your feelings, but there is a fundamental difference between someone being offended and someone being harmed. Okay? Free speech has come under assault because those two things have been conflated and rolled together as if they were the same thing. Now, if I walk around telling everyone that your food is poisoned, that you routinely grown cockroaches into your bread, I am guilty of a variety of defamation and possibly slander and libel as well if I've written it down, depending on how I've spread it. We have adequate laws for covering that. You know, I'm not allowed to say things that cause you to lose your livelihood. I'm not allowed to say things that are clearly and demonstrably untrue or unproven at the very least. I can't harm you by saying untrue things simply to gain some kind of leverage if I'm in competition with you or just a malicious person or an ex-spouse or whatever. I can't do those things. It's wrong. And no one would argue that that was not a legitimate, and it has been for centuries, a legitimate constrainment of free speech, is that you cannot say lies about people that cause them financial and reputational harm, okay, in the real physical world. Okay, if you say something that causes someone to lose money, lose opportunities, and they can demonstrate that they've done that, which is why we have civil legal proceedings, then they're entitled to compensation, and you're entitled to be convicted for that crime. Where it goes astray is when we say, I felt triggered, I felt vulnerable, I felt exploited, okay? Without demonstrating that there's actually been that level of exploitation. Generally, civil proceedings require you to prove it. You have to prove that you were libeled in writing. You have to prove there was defamation, intention to defame as well. You have to prove intention to commit a crime. You have to prove that a crime was committed. These are fundamental features of law, and there has been massive assaults on these in recent times, and it strikes at the liberty of every person on the planet, every group, every person, every culture. It's a threat to all of us. It's universal. And unfortunately, it's perpetuated by multiple groups on the left and the right of politics, so to speak, across the political spectrum. It's bemusing. Look, we're all desperate to try and catch bad actors. Society has always strived to remove the bad actors, the liars, the deceivers, the toxic psychopaths from our realm. We're always trying to do that wherever we can, unless we're lawyers or politicians, in which case it's positively encouraged, but that's for another video. I think one of the best ways to catch a bad actor isn't to shut them down. It isn't to shut everyone down who concerns us. talk about a way of creating more bad actors. But I'll come to that in a little bit. Closing down banter, particularly in the male sphere, banter, locker room talk and humour that we feel propagates ideas that are dangerous, that doesn't work. People adapt. They hide or they leave the group that's judging them so harshly, and they find more amenable colleagues or even recruit vulnerable people to their own little tribe and start creating their own toxic pit. And guess what? No one knows until they run into that group and have a life-changing negative experience, most likely. Why do people do that? Why do they seek to create their own groups or suborn groups that they're in with toxic or unsustainable? I prefer the term unsustainable and non-manageable ideologies. It's because we're tribal by nature. And just pardon me for 1 second. Dirty screen. Yes, production values plus. We need each other. We're social animals. We might be highly individualistic, but we're social animals. And we need each other. We require validation from each other, whether we like to believe it or not. We're deeply individualistic, but we're also deeply collectivist, and there's no way around that. So, hence the incessant flame wars between libertarians and lefties. And as a person who's both, can feel a bit torn at times, but that's actually, I think, a healthier position to be in. I think as soon as you choose a side, as soon as you take too strong a position and deny an aspect of yourself, and deny what you are, and you form who you are on the basis of a partial construct of what you are, it ain't going anywhere good. And it creates a lot of the conflict we see today. So people need each other, people need to band together, people need to make the group reflect what they want it to reflect, and that's a constant tension between members as to want the group to reflect the values that they most find important. But it goes the other way. The group imposes and attempts to coax and convince the individuals within it to conform. And if you have a healthy balance, that group stays challenged. It keeps challenging itself. It keeps talking with ideas. It keeps playing with concepts. It stays open to new ones while remaining rigorous in its approach to what it's going to implement. It requires trust, building trust. So shutting someone down immediately, jumping all over them, telling them they're bad immediately, and telling them they should never say those things again, blah, 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 is a terrible way of building trust. You wouldn't do it in most other circumstances, but increasingly it's become acceptable in our world to do that. One, don't mistake the sin for the sinner. Okay, because a person has a bad idea doesn't make them bad. It doesn't immediately make them dangerous either. Okay, you can work that out over time if the person has a global consciousness that is toxic. That'll become very apparent in the way that they treat each other, treat themselves, treat others. Okay, and even then, it's not ultimately irredeemable. But that's your choice as to whether you want to take that risk, because there is a risk involved in dealing with people who are completely suborned by Nazism or racism or any ism, misandry as much as misogyny or any of those things. Anyone who subscribes to an extreme ideology and seems to be subsumed by far left or far right, you're taking a risk with those people. You really are. But at the same time, it can be worth it. And it's not for me to tell you whether you should or shouldn't take a risk with those people, but recognise that it is a risk. And it might be really worthwhile. You might create one of the best friends you've ever had. You might save someone as well from wandering into partisanship and being lost there forever, which is a horrible place to be lost. It's judgy and nasty and myopic, and the other is you're surrounded by masses of demonized people, and they're not demons, they're just people. Anyway, I go on a tangent again. The expectation that immediately quashing bad ideas is a terrible way of dealing with disputes, and it betrays a massive misunderstanding of human psychology. It tends to drive poor thinking on both participants' parts, the group and the individual they're trying to squash, and it tends to drive those people into the hands of more intellectually able extremists. So you're going to push them right into the group that you didn't want them to join, didn't want to be part of, because you're an unkind motherfucker, okay? And you were so passionate about your ideology that you forgot ideology is about people. It's not about you, it's not about our egos, it's not about us, it's about people as a whole, and people as individuals as well. It's about people. And when we forget that, and we become, the cause becomes more important than the people in it, that's insane, okay? That's insane. That has no legs on it whatsoever. My experience has been that open, rough talk, banter talk, locker room talk, jocularity, and openly discussing, when it gets more serious, openly discussing controversial topics with no reserve and no filters, has more of a chance of revealing prejudicial attitudes in people than anything else. It can also inspire serious questions to be asked in the middle of that jocularity and that joking. You can go, oh, do you really believe that, dude? Do you, like? And you can talk about it and you can discuss it. And in that respect, I'm all down with the PC thing about talking about these things. Absolutely. Our superpower is talking and listening. Listening being the equal member of talking, listening to the other person. Not waiting for them to finish, not listing the points that you can refute, actually listening to their perspective, trying to get a hold on not just the thoughts and the ideas, but the feelings behind it, and trying to understand it as a package, because that's the only way you're ever going to get them to consider anything else but their extreme ideas, whether they be left or right. Doesn't matter. Okay? You've got to treat them like a human being. If you start treating them like a surgical patient on a table, it's not going to go down well for the large part. We want to trigger civil debates. We want respectful debates. And a respectful debate isn't you jumping in with the presumption that you're 100% correct. I feel it needs to be done Socratically, with leading questions, paraphrasing to make sure that you understand what they're saying, and then leading questions, questioning them and getting them to ask questions of themselves. It's often a better way of discussing things that are controversial than straight away going, well, that's wrong. Make suggestions rather than making points, incontrovertible statements of fact. Sometimes you can't. Someone says the earth is flat. What can you do? They're wrong, blatantly and demonstrably wrong in so many ways it's not funny. Those kinds of conversations probably need to be avoided unless the person is genuinely seeking to possibly introduce new ideas into their flat earth framework. If they are, then you can have that conversation. But if they're firmly wedded to it, don't waste your time. It's such an irrational belief. It's amongst many others. There's such irrational beliefs that it is an absolute waste of time discussing those things with them. But don't jump on them either, because they're still your friend. They might be your friend. They might be people you care about. You don't have to dump on them because they have ridiculous beliefs. You still care for them, and you've got to remember that. Well, you should if you want to keep your friends and not offend sundry strangers and work colleagues along the way. It's an avenue to redeeming bad ideas with better ideas. And the only way that you're ever going to get that person to sort of make that exchange is if they feel accepted and they feel cared for, they feel respected. Once people feel disrespected, once they feel that you don't care about them, you don't respect them, and once they feel that there's no avenue for them to criticize your ideas either, that you're going to shut them down every time, and you're not going to allow them to criticize your ideas, which I see on the left in particular, but there's plenty of it on the right. It's like, no, you can't question that. That's not, blah blah blah. LGBTQ rights are sacred and enshrined, and that's it. Of course they are. They are to me, but not necessarily the person I'm talking to, and I have to take that into account. Sometimes you've got to roll the historical curtain back with people and work through the process, and you have to be patient and loving and kind and have some character, okay? Instead of insisting on having everything your way, we all do it, going, well, this is just a fact and you should know it. They don't know it. That's why you're having the conversation. They don't friggin' know it. They don't buy it. They might have heard it, they've never really been introduced to it properly. Your opportunity is to introduce it to them properly. And I've failed so many times in introducing ideas to people properly and wasted opportunities. In the process of work, work very, very hard. How do I talk with people who have bad ideas, or at least incomplete or fragmentary ideas, poorly developed ideas, and introduce them to better ideas? How do I get them to the point where they will in turn be able to introduce me to better ideas as well? And perhaps they already have some in different areas. If we can gain respect in this area, we can share, and we're all enriched as a result. We're all edified by the sharing of ideas. It's the heuristic of civilization. So I don't care if we're having rough talk. I don't care if the language, people conflate language and humour with validation. We joke about the things we hate. We joke about the things we fear. We joke about the things we don't understand, that puzzle us, that hurt us. To take that out of the realm of conversation, both humorous and non-humorous, is an act of censorship. It's an egregious crime against communication. You don't want to censor anything, okay? You want to shut down outright lies, yes you do. But when it comes to the pervading of ideological ideas, religious ideas, most of which I fundamentally disagree with, okay, dumping on the person who holds those ideas, shitting on their ideas, being unkind, being uncompromising and dogmatic doesn't work. It doesn't work. Either don't have the conversations, but if you're going to have them, the only way to work on it is not to censor them, not to cancel them, but to have open conversations with them. Joke about it. Sometimes you can take the piss out of a person's view kindly, but you can take the piss out of the view and they'll give more of a think about it than if you presented some complex, point-ridden, URL-laden diatribe. There's different ways of approaching this, as long as it's approached with heart, with reason, and with heart for the other person. They're still a person. Also, retaining an offender, or retaining someone who's got some offensive attitudes or weird disjunctional beliefs. That can be an excellent thing. I said again, as I said before, assuming it's not a global aspect to their character. I've met some people who have some horribly racist attitudes who are, in general, extremely decent people, thoughtful, decent, kind people, but they have some prejudicial attitudes. Were I to judge them by that one aspect of their belief strata, we would not be friends. I would have no influence on them, and they would still be holding those attitudes today. Fortunately, some of them are no longer as prejudicial as they used to be because we have been talking for years. And I have managed to, probably not the only person, but I'm one of the people that have contributed to ameliorate, mitigate, and even outright reverse some of their beliefs about other peoples in particular, and migrants and so on and so on. You can change that over time. You've got to be patient. This idea that you can just ram raid people because you're right and they're wrong. Well, you're assuming that they're wrong and you're assuming you're right. Let's assume that we're on the same page here, and you probably are right about holding views that respect all human beings equally. Then how do you approach that? You don't approach it by dumping on them. You don't approach it by isolating them or pushing them away, unless they're psychos, and there are psychos. There are people who are mentally unwell, and you're not qualified to deal with them, neither am I, and they need to be pushed away and sent to therapy, okay? And you need to keep your group and yourself safe. That's important. But it's really important that rather than objectifying people and exiling them, that we try to gently insist them like a splinter and break them down slowly, break their shitty ideas down. And if they're willing to engage over time, they'll see it. They'll see the practice and they'll appreciate it a lot more, and they'll be more open to it because the people have been kind to them. The other thing too is society needs to be able to play with ideas, however toxic or unpleasant, to understand them, to develop better epistemological models, to correct these intellectual miscues and to create better alternatives. Most great ideas are imperfect to begin with. and they emerged from a milieu of vastly inferior thoughts. They came out of crap, you know, plants. Our food grows out of shit, literally, and soil and bacteria and gross shit. And then out of it comes the very things that we need to be healthy and thriving. So the intellectual version of that are our conversations. And we desperately need to understand these times that we live in now require an inordinate amount of reform when it comes to how we think about people we disagree with. I disagree with everyone. Now, that might be partly because I'm a stubborn contrarian, and I like to find points of disagreement because I quite enjoy a good debate. But it's also because no one's right all the time. You know, I'd like to say I am, but I'm wrong as much as I'm right. And I'm constantly changing my opinion, altering my positions on different things all the time, because we're not that smart. We're not AIs. We're not. We're just humans. We're clever monkeys. And we need to remember that. Ideologies and religions tend to aggrandize human beings in their own minds. So do intellectual bastions, ivory towers of universities and government. They tend to intellectually insist people into echo chambers and silos of superiority, which are largely undeserved. And certainly, even when they are, such as the case of academia, they are exaggerated grossly. People go far beyond the evidence. They go beyond anything they can prove, you know, and appeals to authority become the norm. And I don't trust that. I don't care who you are or what your qualifications are. I judge you by the quality of your last thought. I judge you by the quality of your last argument. That's what I'm judging. And I don't care where it comes from or who you are or how many numbers you have beside your name and letters. It doesn't matter. The only thing that's important is, what are you saying to me? And does it stand up to any kind of rigorous scrutiny? And are you being an arsehole while you're doing it? Or are you being considerate and kind? Are you being disingenuous and kissing my ass and blowing smoke up it? Or are you being refreshingly honest but civil? These are the nuances that are being lost from conversation. And that damages free speech as well. So not just outright censorship, but the quality of our speech damages free speech. The fact that we need to have better conversations, more full conversations, is as important to free speech as fighting back against censorship and cancel culture. We really don't want to conflate people's ideas and express beliefs with well thought out, strongly held positions, because that isn't the case a lot. A lot of people have passionate beliefs. They throw some stats together. They've got a few university professors here and there, and lo and behold, they have an engineer here or there or whatever, and lo and behold, they have a whole, you know, epistemology for life written out in front of them. You know, there's the course, gurudom, here we come. They're two very different creatures, and you know, if you want to approach life from a sort of justice position, or empathy position, and an intellectual, rigorous position, ethical position, you don't want to be simplifying the layers of this existential onion, you know, to some binary position that's the kind of moral purity that leads to a mass demonization of people because we disagree. That's insane. It's also a way for people to pass the buck collectively. You know, this guy voted for Donald Trump or voted for fucking ScoMo dickbag here in Australia, or, you know, whoever. He's a wanker. No, not necessarily a wanker. They have views. And their views are probably not as well developed as mine, or maybe even yours, but that's not the point. What life have they lived? What's their experience? You've got to consider all those things. If you're interested in understanding and solving a problem, attacking the person isn't the thing you do. You attack the thinking, you look at the conditions, you look at all the contributing variables that might have produced that result. And what I see all over the world is massive amounts of people dispossessed by globalization. I also see a huge amount of wealth and benefits created by globalization. It's a mixed bag. It's a really awesome mixed bag. But it's left a lot of people behind. And the coming disruptions due to automation and AI are going to leave billions more behind. So we need to start looking at that a little more seriously, people are going to develop very bad ideas. They already have, and more of those bad ideas are coming. The resurgence of flat Earth and the resurgence of some of the mystical, fuzzy-wuzzy conspiracy head thinking out there, it's because of the loss of faith in institutions. It's because those institutions have been behaving disgracefully, politicians behaving disgracefully, the media going clickbait crazy and absolutely garnering only to the lowest common denominator, not behaving the way that the fourth estate should be behaving, with the great responsibility it has. They've lost their sacred cause. They've lost their mission. Politicians are no longer on a mission. Well, they've always been scrupulously scheming opportunists, but the ethical basis behind that has been just filtering away, like diluted and washing away in the face of populism and so-called economic pragmatism. We're passing the buck, so, socially, economically, and educationally, and culture-wise, when we leave people who are demographically vulnerable and then blame them for voting for populists. Of course they're going to vote for populists. Most of the populists happen to be right-wing, so the left is screaming, but the left is to a large degree responsible for creating that to begin with. You only have to look at the Blairite government in England to see that. Okay, once they get in and get strong, they're as populist, they're as crony capitalist as anyone else. So I don't see a huge amount of political righteousness on either side of the political fences. What I do see is elite classes exploiting everyone else and the privileged classes shrinking down. They should be concerned. Those who are still in this sort of upper middle class ranks and above should be concerned. They're being hollowed out. There's more billionaires on the planet, but the middle class is shrinking rapidly. That is not a good sign. That's not good health for the economy. It's not good for us. So free speech in an era where these things are happening, where there's mass disruption coming in a whole variety of ways, free speech is going to be absolutely essential. And the most important part of free speech isn't speaking. It's listening. It's hearing other people, trying to understand their perspective. You don't have to agree with it. You don't have to fucking agree with it. You just have to listen and think, what would it be like to be this dude? What would it be like to be this poor guy in Birmingham stealing a TV? Should he be stealing a TV and kicking in an almost equally poor shop owner's shop? No, he shouldn't. But why is he doing it? How did it come about? Is he a spoiled brat? No, he's not. And anyone who says that is just being lazy. It's lazy thinking. Okay? Suffering in the world usually comes from a combination of our own circumstances, our own decisions, and the circumstances created by society as a whole. It's a relationship. And that means we're all guilty. We're all responsible to some degree. You're 100% responsible for yourself, but society is also partly responsible for you too, to a very large degree. Okay? And society is made up of us, so we're all responsible to one another. Free speech is the foundation of that. It really is. The ability to communicate openly and freely without restriction. Even if you're hearing things that are horrible and foul. I'd rather identify the bad actors, number one. I'd rather be able to talk to the bad actors, number two. Okay? Than hide them in the dark and hope they don't stab me in the back. Give it some thought. Cheers. Thanks for that. And we'll have more on Doesn't Matter.